So here I'll start by returning a container, and I'm using container because the container widget gives me a lot of options for setting the background color or background decoration in general for this widget. And that is indeed something I'll need to do here. I want to set the decoration parameter that is supported by container and set it to a box decoration object created with help of the box decoration class, which is provided by Flutter. And I'm using this class here because with that I can create a gradient as we did it before in this course. And therefore, as always, also feel free to pause this video or also the other videos in this section to sometimes try out the next steps on your own. Because here my goal now is to create a linear gradient that uses the category color to transition from one variation of that color, which is simply the color with some opacity, to a different variation. So the same color without or with less opacity. And I'll do this here by creating a linear gradient and setting the colors parameter to a list of colors. And now my first color will be my category color with some opacity. Here I'll go for an opacity of 0.55. And my target color will be the same color, but with less opacity, so that we'll get a nice subtle gradient effect in the end. And I'll have a target opacity of 0.9 here. Now we can also configure this gradient and define where it begins and ends, as you learned. And here I'll make it begin by setting alignment to top left and set end to alignment bottom right. And of course I also need to add a comma here. So with that I'm adding a decoration to this container, but that's not all. The container also should get a child, hence we should set the child parameter on the container. And the child is simply the widget that will be placed inside of the container. And here I want to have the text widget with the category title as a text, but also with some styling applied. And here for the styling, I'll use my theme with theme off, as you learned it in the theming course section, to reach out to the text theme, and then there the title large theme. I want to apply the styling of the title large theme in the end. But I'll then copy this with some extra settings, though for that I must add an exclamation mark here to tell Dart that the title large text theme will be defined, which it will be since I'm using this Google Fonts defined text theme here, which does define text themes for all the different text variations. So this will work. But with that I can copy this default text theme, and then here I just want to change the color and set that to theme of context color scheme to access the color scheme that was inferred by Flutter based on some base color that I set in main Dart, this base color here. And then from that color scheme here I'll choose the on background color. And you know it, you can and should always play around with things like this to try out different colors or different configurations so that you really get a good feeling for how Flutter works and how different widgets and objects can be configured in different ways. So that's the color I want to apply here. And with that added, there's just one last thing, for now at least. I want to add some padding to this container. And therefore, I'll set the padding parameter, which thankfully is supported by container, which makes container a quite versatile widget. And I'll set the padding to edge insets all 16 to add a padding of 16 pixels in all directions. And this is then a const object. With that, we can go to categories Dart, because there I want to use this category grid item which I just created. And we should delete those dummy text widgets now, and instead use the dummy categories that are defined in the dummy data file, and output those here in the categories screen in the categories Dart file. For this, in this list here, which is set as a value for children, we can use a for in loop to go through all the categories in available categories, which is the name of this constant value here in dummy data. And for that to work in this screen file, you of course must import the dummy data Dart file, which is in the data folder, into this file here. So this import here must be added. But with it added, you can go through all the categories, and we have to remove const now, since now we're deriving the list content dynamically. And when going through the categories here, you can then define the widget that should be output for every category. And here that will be the category grid item. And of course, category grid item is only available if you add this import here, where you import the category grid item Dart file, which is stored in the widgets folder, into this file here. So with that imported, we can use this here. And it is also worth noting that using this for loop here is only an alternative to using available categories.map and then getting hold of every category like this and returning the category grid item like this in here, and then calling toList. So that would be the alternative to writing it like this. I mentioned this before, but it's really important to keep things like this in mind, which is why I'm mentioning it again here. So with that, we're outputting one category grid item per category in available categories, and we're passing the category as a value for the category parameter to this widget. And with that, if you then save this and force a reload, you should see these category items here. This is not entirely the final look I want to have, but it's a good start. This grid view is also scrollable by default, by the way, if we would exceed the available screen space here. But with that, we're almost there. I now just want to go back to the grid view and also set the padding parameter on that, which thankfully is supported, to also give this grid view some padding. And here I'll choose edge insets all 24 as a value, so that these items don't sit directly on the edges. And with that, this doesn't look too bad. We got these nice categories here. But of course, now I want to make sure that A, they have rounded corners, and B, more important, they are tappable. Because right now, if I tap them, nothing happens. And that, of course, needs to change.